Welcome, guys, to How the Frack We Got Here, a show that takes the news and events of the week and try to make sense out of it all. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan, and on this show, we simply are all about the facts. There are plenty of news stations out there that simply want to do anything short but inform you. Here at How the Frack We Got Here, that's all we believe in. We go up to the left, we go up to the right, we go up to the middle of independence, we go after all sides because there's more than one side of a story to everything. And you need to know it all in order to actually formulate your own opinion. And that's what we try to do here at How the Frack We Got Here. Thanks for listening, and hold on. It's going to be fun. Welcome, guys.
Oh, it got away from me. It always gets away from me. There we go. Sorry about that. Today's date, February 1st, 2023, and this is How the Frack We Got Here. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan. On the Frack We Got Here, we do take the events of the week and try to make sense of it all. Before we get started, guys, to let you know that even though we are a news podcast, we try to watch our language. Sometimes words do fly. Let's just be honest. At the same time, there may be things that might be shown that might be too graphic for younger viewers, so viewer discretion is advised, especially after the night. Aside from that, welcome. So, how do we start with this? Well, the only way we can start with this, guys, is that we just basically have to address the elephant in the room. As we all know it, guys, that footage was released on the Tyre Nichols murder. Let's just call it what it is. Was released after last Friday. And of course, parts of it we're going to be showing as they are explained that the case is opening because other officers by now have been included as well as some paramedics. But before we get started, of course, viewer discretion is advised.
Shook the nation are still reverberating tonight and shaking loose some important new details. Memphis police today confirming a sixth and now seventh officer has been removed from the job over the incident. Earlier today, officials acknowledged that Officer Preston Hemphill was on the scene of Tyre Nichols' brutal beating that night, and they have just confirmed another previously unidentified officer has also been taken off the job. That would be officer number 7. Last week, 5 officers were charged with second-degree murder, and the fallout now extending to the Memphis Fire Department. 2 medical technicians and a lieutenant fired over their handling of the incident. The death of Tyre Nichols has become the latest reckoning for a country still struggling to define and bring about police reform. Priscilla Thompson has the latest for us from Memphis and a warning: we will be showing some of that graphic video in this report.
Tonight, the Memphis Fire Department terminating 2 medical workers, Robert Long and Jamichael Sandridge, and 1 lieutenant, Michelle Whittaker, who all responded to the police beating of Tyre Nichols. The department says an internal investigation found they violated numerous MFD policies and protocols. 2 Memphis police officers are on administrative leave as investigations into the brutal beating death of Tyre Nichols continues. One of the officers, Preston Hemphill, a 5-year veteran of the force, was relieved of duty alongside the 5 now fired officers shortly after the January 7th traffic stop, according to the department. They say information about the disciplinary action was not immediately released because the investigation is still ongoing.
You guys are really doing a lot right now. Bro.
Hemphill can be seen on his body cam helping pin Nichols down during the initial confrontation until Nichols fled on foot. Authorities say he used a taser.
I hope they stomp his ass.
Nichols died 3 days later. An attorney for Hemphill says his client was never present at the second scene and is cooperating with the investigation.
We think that he should be terminated like the other 5 black officers that were terminated.
Attorneys for the family of Tyre Nichols calling the revelation disappointing, saying in a statement, it certainly begs the question why the white officer involved in this brutal attack was shielded and protected from the public eye, and to date from sufficient discipline and accountability. On Saturday, the Memphis Police Department announced it would permanently deactivate its Scorpion unit that the 5 ex-officers now charged with murder belong to.
Units of that kind sometimes can, both in Memphis and around the country, can sometimes breed a culture of over-aggressiveness.
Officials declined to say whether Hemphill was a member of the unit, created little over a year ago to address violent crime. All of this has led to renewed calls for police reform, putting pressure on lawmakers to revisit now stalled negotiations that began after the murder of George Floyd. In the Senate, Republican Tim Scott and Democrat Cory Booker, who helped lead those negotiations, now expressing a willingness to return to the table. But any legislation would face an uphill battle in the Republican-controlled House, where some leaders are already expressing doubt.
I don't know that any law, any training, any reform is going to change. This man was handcuffed. They continued to beat him.
Tonight, lawmakers still divided on the path forward as Tyree's parents move ahead with funeral plans.
Priscilla, a lot going on in the story today. What is next for the police officers who have been charged?
Lester, those 5 former officers are due in court for the first time next month. Attorneys for 2 of the ex-officers say their clients will plead not guilty.
Oh, for some odd reason, my system decided to go nuts for a second. Sorry about that. But yes, as you guys can see, that basically a 7th officer and 3 paramedics, which is weird. The 7th officer hasn't been fired yet, but the 3 paramedics have. And for a lot of people, it's the whole idea of just, how can I put this ever so nicely? A good question. And what would that question actually be? What is it about this white officer that somehow is on administrative leave, but not immediately fired, not immediately charged with second-degree murder? Because I always want to point this type of stuff out because it needs to be pointed out. The reason why it needs to be pointed out is because you'll get certain stories out there, or certain individuals, those of the Fox News variety, will always sit there and say, well, all police officers should be held equal. They should all be held to the same standard. Yet, whenever it comes to black officers, we're a little bit quicker to go ahead and have them taken care of, and they get charged. I mean, it's not like Amber Geiger, who got 10 years for going into the wrong apartment and shooting a defenseless man. It's not like it's not like Darren. It's not like the man who killed George Floyd, who will see probably close to 40 years in prison, which is the longest extent of a prison penalty that we've seen so far. But if you haven't noticed, the officers that did get charged for crimes against people of color really did not get long sentences. However, people of color who are officers, completely different story.
Of Minnesota at this hour, Mohammed Noor, the former Minneapolis police officer who shot 911 caller Justine Damon in 2017, has just been resentenced to 57 months in prison. Noor was initially convicted of manslaughter and third-degree murder in 2019, but that murder conviction was thrown out last month by the Minnesota Supreme Court, triggering this resentencing. NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald is outside the Hennepin County Courthouse for us to help us understand what's going on here. Megan, walk us through how the case got here and how the judge landed on that 57 months.
Yeah, Aaron, a lot of moving parts here. So certainly worth reiterating that in 2019, that is when Noor was convicted and sentenced for that third-degree murder charge. And he was sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison. But ever since then, his attorneys have been trying to get that third-degree murder charge thrown out. And so, as you mentioned, just last month, the Minnesota Supreme Court ruled that that should be thrown out because there wasn't enough evidence. So today, Noor back in court for resentencing on that second-degree manslaughter charge, which brings a maximum of 57 months in prison. That is what he received from the judge today, but he will be getting credit for time served, Aaron.
And Megan, before the sentencing, both sides of this had a chance to address the court. What did they have to say today?
So Damon's family members submitted victim impact statements that were read by the attorneys, and they were basically calling for the maximum sentence for Noor, saying, look, this was an innocent woman who approached a squad car and was shot and killed, losing her life. Then we heard from from Damon's fiance via Zoom, and then we heard from Noor, who responded to what the fiance had to say. I want you to take a listen to this.
She taught that all people deserve mercy and that all people can transform. And I have no doubt she would have forgiven you, Mohammed.
I'm deeply grateful for Mr. Damon's forgiveness. I'm deeply sorry for the pain that I've caused that family, and I will take his advice and be a unifier. Thank you.
Now, Noor could get out of prison as early as next year for good behavior, Aaron.
All right, Megan Fitzgerald for us.
Okay, so let's look at it this way. Muhammad Noor, for all y'all don't remember, about a few years ago, was in a squad car. A white woman from Australia approached his car. He sat there and said, out of fear for his life, he shot and killed the woman. Of course, he was immediately relieved of duty. He was then fired. He was then brought up on charges. He was indicted, found guilty within 2 days of his trial, and got the maximum sentencing. We're in the same boat now, where you have 6 black officers, now 7 if you count the white one, who are now all facing second-degree murder charges. Which, if you've seen the video by now, it is beyond the pale that yes, they should get murder charges without a shadow of a doubt. But it's interesting that a lot of people will sit there and say, and they will say this a lot. Well, it's not just white officers, it's black officers too. Okay. I just showed you a video where a black officer was tried and immediately expedited as if he was a criminal himself. And he was a cop. Was the fraternal police there for him? No. Did you see any law enforcement officials there on his behalf? No. Did you see his union rep right beside him? No. You didn't see any of that, guys. Because why? He's a black officer. And I've never understood that. I understand that for those who want to serve in law enforcement, I get it. If you think it's a calling, if you think you can change it within, be my guest. But if history has ever showed us that whether or not you are a badge, your skin color makes all the difference in the world. Because now those 6 black officers will be tried as they should, will be expedited as they should, will probably get the maximum sentencing as they should. A white person will probably get at least a year before he sees court. So again, you can sit there and argue with me all you want, but the truth of the matter is that yes, there is a racial problem, especially with police and police of color. Now, of course, his funeral did pass at this moment. Has occurred since we are recording this on a Wednesday, so his funeral did pass. Now becomes a story again. Whenever it comes to police brutality and people of color, it always comes back to police reform. 2 words that every white person and Tim Scott, who is the token black person of the Republican Party, hates to hear.
One of the things you heard from Antonia in her reporting are these calls for accountability, right? That includes here in Washington with calls for police reform on Capitol Hill ahead of this meeting between the president and the Congressional Black Caucus later on this week. Give us a gut check on that push. I think it was 24 hours ago on I think it was this show where you said, hey, in reality, something would have to change significantly with the calculus to get something across the finish line. Is that where we are today? Are some of the discussions, do you think, opening any windows toward police reform on the federal level?
Hallie, I don't think we've moved significantly towards action at this point. You talk about the pressure and the calls for accountability. The challenges right now, those are largely coming from one side of the political aisle. It has been primarily Democrats who have engaged on this issue, whether it's the Congressional Black Caucus wanting to meet with the president to discuss this, whether it's pressure on the president to bring this up and focus more of his attention on this issue in the State of the Union, whether it's the reintroduction of something like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which passed the House in the last Congress twice, but only with Democratic votes. That's not going to get off the ground in a Republican-controlled House, and it's not going to get to 60 in the Senate. And right now, leadership in the House in the 2 different parties is looking at this issue in an entirely different way. Here's a little bit from House Democratic and Republican leadership from just this morning.
You can count on us to introduce measures that will further accountability within policing. We have been very clear as a House Democratic Caucus.
I'm strongly against getting rid of qualified immunity or this whole defund the police movement where some people try to take advantage of that to go after cops who are good cops.
So I had that conversation with Steve Scalise. I asked him if the House Republicans would put anything on the floor. He pointed to one House Republican bill from the last Congress. There is, of course, the Justice Act, which was Tim Scott's kind of answer to the negotiations he was having on policing that he may try to bring back forward in this Congress, although he gave a speech on the floor last night, which did not sound especially optimistic. Hallie, when you think about this, even on Fox News, for example, Republican lawmakers aren't particularly getting asked about this. There's just not the same pressure on that side of the aisle to make this a federal issue. And I think until that changes, we're right where we were yesterday and where we were, unfortunately, before Mr. Nichols was killed, which is basically nowhere on police reform as a federal.
Okay, so I love how they, whenever it comes to Tim Scott, this is gonna, I can't stand. I try not to be that guy. I try not to be that guy because whenever police reform comes up, and if you watch my podcast, I've talked about this, that police reform was discussed between Democrat Senator Cory Booker and Republican Senator at the time, the only black guy in the Republican Party at the time. There's actually two in the Republican Party now, so I guess they call that progress. Tim Scott single-handedly killed the George Floyd Police Reform Act because it didn't match up. His main job was not to co-bill with Senator Booker on getting police reform done. His job was to basically pull a Trump. Argue it, extend it, deny it until it's moot, until nothing can be done, until the clock runs out. That's what Senator Tim Scott does. And even now, when they go back to Senator Tim Scott, you know what he says? He says, and forgive my language, BS like this.
70% of what the House Democrats were asking for, we on our side of the aisle said, this makes sense. Why don't we find common ground in that 70%, make it into a piece of legislation, and show the American people that, yes, their elected officials can at times act with common sense. Because my assumption was that common ground leads to common sense. Imagine my disappointment, Mr. President, when the duty to intervene, de-escalation training, more resources, more reporting, so that I have eyes around the country, was filibustered in this chamber. Not enough votes to even extend the conversation on the important issue of policing in America. And I came back just a week later, on June the 24th, standing on this floor, asking our body to take seriously our responsibility on the important topic of policing in America. And when I said, Mr. President, that day, June 24th of 2020, that there is trouble coming, I referred to the good book, the Bible, and reflected on Ezekiel 33:6 that says that when you see trouble coming and you say nothing, you do nothing, the blood that comes is on your hands. But if you shout from the mountaintops, if you warn the people that trouble is coming, it's not on your hands.
Oh, there it is. There it is. For a conservative, it has to be three things: God, guns, and country. He's covered two of them. I don't know when he's going to get to the gun part yet, because he's, as a lot of people have already said, and I see that, Chris, yeah, filibuster bullshit. You're exactly right. It's the whole idea. And again, this was his main job. His main job was not to introduce any bills. If you really want to be honest, it was not his job to introduce any bills. Because, I'm just going to just point this out. If you want to know what his bill is, I'll gladly show you. His bill was this right here. The Just and Unifying Solutions to Invigorate Communities Everywhere Act of 2020, otherwise known as the Justice Act. Now, the summary of this is, because if you go through the entire bill, it's actually a bunch of bullshit. But the summary of this is, the bill addresses policies and issues regarding practices and laws of enforcement accountability. This bill funds state and local grants, incentivizes state and local reporting of the use of certain policing practices, creates new federal offenses for certain misconduct, establishes a commission to study the conditions affecting Black men and boys, and establishes best practices and training requirements. Let me tell you why it's a load of crap. It's a load of crap because it's pretty much words. The bill funds state and local grants. That means that he wants to get the power of it back to the states, which, as we've known by now, states do not do well when on their own. That's why there's federal oversight. Incentivizing state and local reporting on the issues of certain policing practices. That means that they have to report to somebody, but there's no governing body. I mean, you can sit and report to whoever you want to, but unless they are told that this is the federal standard, states are going to do what they want. Creates new federal offenses for certain misconduct. You understand, misconduct is a broad term. There's nothing direct about what the offenses were and what misconduct is. Establishes a commission to study the conditions affecting Black men and boys. Do you know how many times mental health studies have been pushed through Congress and shot down, especially when affecting people of color? It has never been allowed. Not in its existence of the U.S. Continental Congress. Now the U.S. Congress has ever done a mental study on people of color. Never. Even when the CDC wanted to do a study on mental health and gun safety, Republicans and then the NRA shot that down because, you know why? It would show that America has a little bit of a gun problem. And again, the fact that he's establishing best practices and training requirements, again, it's all just words. That is word salad at its best. That was his bill. Now, you know what the other bill was? Again, the George Floyd Police Reform Act. Here's the reason why Republicans shot this down. The reason why Republicans shot this down: bolstering police accountability. That's direct and to the point that all law enforcement will be held accountable for their actions. Create a national police misconduct registry. That means that prevents law enforcement officers, if they are fired in one city or state, that they cannot go to another city and state and still be law enforcement officers. Again, Republicans didn't like that. Ban no-knock warrants in federal drug cases. Again, no-knock warrants have led to the deaths of Breonna Taylor and countless others. Now, especially in federal drug cases. Again, should be banned. Ban chokeholds and corduroy holds. Anybody who's ever watched wrestling will tell you off the bat, a chokehold and corduroy holds are not good, especially if done properly. You can hurt or even kill someone. Law enforcement should not have that. Prohibit profiling based on race and religion. Again, police hate that. Now, the big boy in qualified immunity. For all those that don't know what qualified immunity basically shields law enforcement from certain aspects. For example, did you not know that a policeman does not have to report their actions for 48 hours of that event? You know how if you're arrested and you're brought in, that you have to give an immediate accounts of everything as they question you before a law enforcement officer. You have at least 24 hours before you have to give a statement. Kind of messed up, isn't it? That's qualified. That's part of qualified immunity because, again, they are given that grace period. Now, my thing is, if you don't give that grace period to a person that's been accused or caught red-handed, why should a law enforcement officer do the same? And then my personal favorite, makes it easier to prosecute officers accused of misconduct. Again, Republicans are against that. Now, that was the actual bill that was submitted that Tim Scott and Cory Booker went over. And for the simple fact matter of it, Tim Scott decided to say, we can't do this. Now, why couldn't he? Because he's been giving his marching orders. He has been given his marching orders to make sure that bill doesn't get past the Senate, even though that bill got past the House. That same bill on police reform, because you guys heard me say this on this podcast a lot, that you train longer to be a truck driver, you train longer to be a contractor, you train longer to be a hairstylist in most states than you do for law enforcement. You do. I can tell you right now, and I want somebody in Tennessee to disagree with me on this. In the state of Tennessee where I live, you realize you can train for less than 6 months, you can be a law enforcement officer. Less than 6 months. Half a year, you're out there protecting and serving. Now, think about that. Could you honestly get to the point to where you can be out there policing and serving in half a year at a job that has so many requirements, so many policies, so many procedures and things that you need to follow that you think you're going to get that down in half a year? At the same time, why do law enforcement have all these protections out there? Because they know they're going to make mistakes. But they've been given a grace period. But going back to again Tyree Nichols, this is just a matter of how police are able to operate. That's why police, you understand, that's why back to my theory on recordings. When police do nothing wrong, recordings come out immediately. When they look at the body cam footage and go, oh, well, this person did nothing wrong, of course release the footage because it's justifying the officer. Which in some cases we have seen where the officer was justified. There was one here in Nashville where an officer, did his best not to shoot at a woman because of a simple traffic stop, and she shot at him first. Again, I'll give kudos to that. That's an exception to the rule. But at the same time, if there is something found or if the officer did do something wrong, you see how long it takes for them to give out the footage. And why? You want to taint the witness? You want to taint the witness pool that's going to be coming from? You're not going to come from the same state where these officers work from. No, you're going to pull people that's hopefully never seen the case. You're afraid that people are going to riot and burn down things and destroy properties and homes. This ain't Detroit, although they did get the job done. And again, I get the mother Tyree Nichols saying she wants peace. We don't want anything burned down. We don't want anything destroyed. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge the anger. And you have to acknowledge that, whether you're a person of color, whether you're a parent, you're a mom, a dad, brother, or sister, we all have to worry now about us leaving the house. And if we do encounter police, are we going to walk away from it? Because for the longest time, police have been given a green light to kill people of color and get away with it. And even more so now that it's shocking, or really it's not shocking to us, because we've seen officers who are black officers who treat people of color just as rough, if not worse, than non-POC counterparts. But we're seeing that the wheels of justice spin faster when they're black and slower when they're not. And even more so if you go to Fox News of all places. Fox News, how they spin this story, it honestly mystifies me.
I do. I learned how to make gumbo watching that show too. So it's the reason that I found out why cops do bad things in the first place, and it's apparently because people are so mean to them.
This is a direct result of all this defund the police stuff, right?
And if you vilify the cops, you'll get less people wanting to be cops.
These endless wars on police departments now, they have dissuaded a lot of good people from becoming police officers. That's a fact. They've had recruitment problems and they've had retention problems. You can look at the data like I can. And what happens is you wind up getting stuck, plain and simple, with just bad guys.
You would think he got his ass whipped, right? But the great thing about it is I got a good guy from Fox to say they are bad cops. I got him to agree with Antifa. See, that's... I've been here one day and I'm changing shit already. It's going great. But there's one guy on Fox News, and this dude came up with something that I got to tell you, I really did not see it coming.
Looked like gang violence to me. It looked like what young black men do when they're supervised by a single black woman. And that's what they got going on in the Memphis Police Department. They've elected some or put some black woman in charge of the police force. And we're getting the same kind of chaos and disunity and violence that we see in a lot of these cities that are run by single mothers.
What the is he talking about? What is he? So it is single black mothers that are the problem. So wait a minute. All of these cops, all of them, they had single black mothers too? And by the way, those are the images that came up when I Googled good cops.
I mean, yeah, as funny as that is, DL has a point that if you look at Fox News, and that's, even though it's on Comedy Central, still pulled from Fox News, that's what they show, because Fox News isn't a real news station. There's been plenty of lawsuits out there that have sat there and said Fox News is not a real news station, but there are plenty of people out there of the Mayo variety, the bleached, the rice cake warriors, you know who you are, that will watch Fox News religiously and take it as gospel. They will look at the three-headed hydra of Fox News, the Tucker Carlson, the Laura Ingraham, the Sean Hannity. They will look at that three-headed hydra because their job is to spin it. Their job is to make the victim look like he caused his own demise. They have to make it look like, oh, it's law enforcement. That's not the problem. You're just going to have bad guys. And of course, they find Jason Whitlock, a man who reminds me of Kanye West if Kanye West was a little bit older and gained a little bit more weight and was just a lot less talent. They find him because Fox News does what they do best. They have their token black people. They have their token black people where they come forward and sit there and say, if I get this token black people to say what I say, then it's not racist because it comes from them. Jason Whitlock has made his career off downing black people, much like Candace Owens, that cunt, and many others. But the fact of the matter that he sat there and said, well, it's because they're under a single black woman, that was the problem. And the funny part is, as crazy as that is, that will be repeated. That will be repeated. That will be recited. That will be recycled. And you will run into somebody on the street. They'll be like, "Well, if those officers just had a man as their commanding officer, that would never happen because Fox News said it." Yeah, they'll say that, and that's the scary part about all this is that again, when it comes to police accountability, even with this, I'm like, what is it going to take? George Floyd should have been the catalyst. The George Floyd police reform bill should have went through because yes, we want to hold law enforcement accountable. If we're giving you the ability to protect and serve us, then yes, you should be held accountable. You should get more training. Although if you look at the representative Jim Jordan, who believes that, oh, I don't know training, I don't know of additional training, I don't know of additional time and things of that nature, and new rules are going to help. Really? Ask the United Kingdom, ask most European countries, ask Asia, ask Australia, because their crime rates are lower than ours. That's just the truth. At the same time, do you know in the United Kingdom that you train 3 years to be a law enforcement officer? In Australia, it's 4. In those very same countries I just named, they have additional de-escalation training. They have mental and physical health screenings. They have requirements for gun validation. They have to go through rigorous training. At the same time, crime is less. But yet, over on our side of the world, they think policing is just fine. And of course, don't get me wrong about the Congressional Black Caucus. I think that them going to President Joe Biden may help. But keep in mind, that's the same Joe Biden that created the crime bill of 1984. The same crime bill that he helped create that put nearly 100,000 more law enforcement officers on the street, that actually introduced the 3-strike rule, that actually multiplied prison populations to what they are now. The same guy who literally gave millions, if not billions of dollars to law enforcement groups to militarize them against the crime wave at the time. That guy. And you have the Congressional Black Caucus going to an 80-year-old man and saying, well, something needs to be done. In the meantime, you have Tim Scott saying, well, nobody wants to support my bill, so I'm not going to support yours. Yep. In typical Republican fashion, because that's what they do. Republicans, when they get in office, do nothing more than to dismay, direct, and give money to the rich and the corporates. But everybody else, it's either a handout, socialism, or the fact that people on welfare are eating shrimp and steak, while those who have worked meaningful jobs will sit there and say, well, how does this person on EBT get shrimp and steak and I got to settle for ramen? You're mad at the wrong people, but that's how the Republicans designed it. So, yeah, with the Congressional Black Caucus meeting with the president, I don't see a lot happening from there. I do say this all the time. This is why I say voting, not just federally, but locally, matters. The only way you're going to change our cities and towns is to get active and get people in that are going to do what needs to be done. Because from a federal level, it will take a whole lot longer with a Republican-controlled House and a Democrat-controlled Senate, and probably the most centrist president we've had since Clinton, actually. But I digress. Speaking of the president, though, of course, this document thing just keeps getting worse and worse as more news comes out that one of his offices is actually getting searched. To Fox News out there, search means actual search, not raided.
Tonight, we're learning about another FBI search related to President Biden and his handling of classified information. This time, FBI agents going through his private office at a think tank in Washington. Two senior law enforcement officials tell NBC News. The search happened back in November after Biden attorneys discovered classified documents there and did not involve a search warrant. But the public was never told about that FBI search by either the White House or the Justice Department, despite the White House's repeated insistence that it's being transparent with the American people. Just yesterday, the president dismissing a question about whether he would sit for an interview with the special counsel.
I don't even know about this question.
That investigation sparked by multiple discoveries of classified documents at Mr. Biden's private office, at least one of which was marked top secret, according to sources, and at his Delaware home, including in the garage.
I think you're going to find there's nothing there. I have no regrets.
Now, NBC News has learned President Biden's notebooks were among the items the FBI took from one of his Delaware homes, according to a source familiar with the investigation. The president facing growing criticism.
The president says he's been so transparent about these documents, but for 2 months, he and his administration and his attorneys kept this information from the public days before an election.
Tonight, neither the White House or Justice Department would comment on the FBI search.
See, this is why I say with some news isn't really worth reporting. Yes, the president was found with documents, first at his home, then now his office. Okay, this is why I say this is not really this is a non-story, if you will. Because again, the only big difference between him, actually the big difference between him, because Mike Pence got caught with documents as well. So between creepy Christian Mike Pence, Joe Biden, who, by the way, have cooperated, given all this information, have allowed searches to be done at their homes or offices, wherever documents may be, cooperated fully. That's why there's no problem. But if you agree with our Republican friends on the side, oh, well, Trump got raided. No, he didn't. He got searched. There's a big difference between a raid and a search. When they have to coordinate so much to go after one man in Florida, that is a search. When they just kick the door in, guns blazing, that's a raid. Big difference. But again, this is a non-story. So they found secret documents. My thing was, unless he had nuclear launch codes, unless he knew where Jimmy Hoffa was, unless he knew where Jimmy Hoffa's body was buried, or any other secret that compromises national security, and that has to be an insecure place, then let him be tried accordingly. Aside from that, it's a slow news day, apparently, from what I get from it. But if you believe Trump, they're treating Joe Biden differently from me. No, you're getting treated exactly how you should be treated, Mr. Failure in Chief. But I digress. But here's the thing that kills me now, since we're still sticking to Florida, the current holder of the Hold My Beer championships. I just have to ask this question before I play this video. Just how powerful is the seat of governor in Florida? Because one white man, decided that an AP African American course need to be scaled down. Think about this for a second. A white man who is the governor of Florida decided that African American studies has to be scaled down because it has woke and indoctrination policies. And now we play the video.
Langston Hughes knows who Langston Hughes is.
Tonight, the College Board unveiling a new framework for advanced placement African American studies after pressure from critics to not include topics like Black Lives Matter and sexual orientation. A critique many students in the pilot course resisted.
It really hurt. I thought we were moving forward in life.
The College Board saying its new syllabus includes the study of Black artists, inventors, and gay Americans pivotal in the civil rights movement.
This is the beginning of a process that will more democratize American education and rightfully put forward where it is that Black studies should be in the curriculum across the board.
This latest chapter of U.S. education debate sparking protest and legal pushback in Florida last week.
Black history is American history.
Republican Governor Ron DeSantis banning the pilot AP course in Florida, his latest move restricting the teaching of race and sexuality in public schools.
When you try to use Black history to shoehorn in queer theory, you are clearly trying to use that for political purposes.
The College Board's new curriculum will no longer include authors flagged by Florida officials as scholars of concern, but it says the revisions were made independently from political pressure, adding it consulted with more than 300 professors of African American studies and piloted the course in 60 schools across the country.
Do you believe this updated course framework will be enough for Florida to lift their current ban?
I do not believe that Florida is going to lift the ban because it's never been about this course. The governor was very clear. African American studies doesn't have educational value. And I think that the governor has led with that. The government has demonstrated that through policy, through comments, and so forth.
The course is set to launch nationwide in the upcoming school year. Zinclair Samoa.
Yep. I just have to ask this question. I mean, I understand as a governor, you may have some flexibility as far as the state, but how much does DeSantis have in this state to where he can just do whatever it is that he wants to do? Because in my mind, Florida is kind of like Nazi Germany just with theme parks. I mean, it's amazing that he sits there and says, only in African American studies, like, oh, we're going to put in, well, you can't shoehorn in queer theories. You mean LGBTQ history? This is why I sit there and say it's amazing because DeSantis, who is considering running for governor, which I always said was scary because he's basically Trump 2.0. He's smarter. That's what's so freaking scary about it. But it is amazing to me that those like him will say, oh, it's about being woke and indoctrination and things of that nature. No. I mean, for the simple fact of the matter is, what is it about America that is so scary about teaching actual history? I never understood that because for all you guys that don't remember, or may not remember, Lovecraft Country, which was on HBO, its first 3 episodes talked about history, especially in the South. The Tulsa Massacre, which a lot of people did not know about, that a prominent black town was pretty much wiped out by a white fueled riot. Sundown towns, which still exist to this day, they may not have that same enforcement, where if you are caught in a sundown town, police can hang you. Yes, they don't want to talk about that. And I've never understood because America has never been this cookie cutter, red, white, and blue, we've done everything right history. America has a long, dark, bloody history of murder, genocide, pillaging, and things of that nature. And for some odd reason, we don't want to talk about it. We'll talk about everybody else's country. We'll talk about everybody else's country, everybody else's history, no problem. But when it comes to good old US of A, oh, let's just skip the dark parts. But when it comes to African American studies, a white person is going to sit there and say, no, I don't like that. But apparently has enough juice to make the entire curriculum for the state change it. Make that make sense, because it doesn't to me. Because I'm sorry, if studying America in its true history makes the Mayo uncomfortable, it should, because these were your ancestors. If you don't learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. Moving right along, guys, we did want to cover this story as well because, again, another potential shooting happened, but thankfully, this was thwarted. But, again, it does go to the nature of guns in America and that some individuals really should not have these type of guns.
At least 6 shots inside the building. Parties are running out.
Tonight in Nebraska, an all too familiar tragedy narrowly avoided. Police say this Omaha target nearly became the scene of yet another mass shooting. This after investigators say around noon today, a man armed with an AR-15 rifle walked into the store and began shooting.
AR-15 rifle with him and plenty of ammunition. There's evidence to suggest with shell casings that he entered the target and was firing rounds. It's unknown at this time if he was firing at anybody.
Some ran into the parking lot.
Just a really loud bang, and it sounded just like something fell, and we kind of all looked around each other like, I hope that wasn't what I thought it was.
Minutes later, Omaha police officers rushed the store.
The first arriving officers went into the building, confronted the suspect and shot him dead.
Omaha police have not named the deceased gunman, describing him as a white man in his 30s. Also no word on motive. After searching the store, both police and Target confirm no one else was hurt.
Omaha police tonight applauding the Target employees who helped shoppers escape safely, noting staff at that store had recently gone through active shooter training.
That's wild, ain't it? Let's be honest. That's wild. That really is wild to have to go through active shooter training, to have to go through active shooter drills. But that's the reality of the world that we live in, especially in this day and age. For the simple fact of the matter is, I still ask this question. And again, this is coming from a gun owner. I have nothing against extreme. I have nothing against extensive backgrounds. I have nothing against red flag laws. I have nothing against mental health screenings. I have nothing against going through a required course every year and requalifying. I have nothing against any of that. I would gladly do that to prove that I am a capable and responsible gun owner. No problem. But a lot of people hate the fact whenever gun reform is being brought up, the first thing they'll say is, well, criminals can still get guns. Not realizing the last couple of shootings were not done by illegally purchased handguns. The last couple of shootings were by guns that were already purchased legally, just found in the home, easily accessible, and more than likely in the hands of somebody who shouldn't have it. It could be as anybody from a man that was entering Target to a 6-year-old going to a school and shooting his teacher in the chest. The point I'm making is gun reform does need to happen. For the simple fact of the matter is this, that there are people in this country that have access to handguns, way too much access to ammunition, at the same time not being screened enough to where we can make sure that these guns stay in the hands of those people. Because it's not the criminals. And that's usually the argument. And that's the argument they usually say whenever it comes to gun reform, Republicans go to two different things. Well, criminals will still get guns, and look at Chicago. They will always say Chicago. Chicago is like their Benghazi because Chicago has the strictest gun laws, but still has the highest crime rates. But they don't take into account where those crime rates are coming from, because it's not just about guns and murder. It's about lack of, inequality, job income, educational, financial opportunities. Those things can hamper a neighborhood if taken away from them. And if you take away those things from a neighborhood, what's going to happen? Crime is going to go up. But, people over at Fox News aren't going to say that. But again, this just begs the question, what is going to be done now? Because yes, thankfully, nothing didn't happen at this Target and, no lives were lost. But who's not to say the next time somebody might just feel up to just picking up an AR-15 or pick up a handgun, much like at Half Moon Bay, where an ex-employee decided that, hey, people need to die. Even though he had a previous history of violence. My point being is things need to change the gun reform side, and until they do, we are going to see more events like this. But speaking of events we should know about, guys, this story I did talk about a while back about a man at this point now we know he is Jason Lewis, the man who was accused of shooting a 13-year-old Karen Blake outside of his home because he thought the kid was trying to steal cars. He has now been charged with second-degree murder.
I will be providing an update. MPD's investigation of 13-year-old Karan Blake. Any loss of life, especially that of a child in the District of Columbia, is tragic. I stood before you all a few days after the shooting while rumors and misinformation were circulating in the community. I asked for the community's patience and explained the process that our detectives undergo to make sure that no stone goes unturned. I want to thank the community for their support and for people stepping up with real information and real evidence to help our investigation. In each case, including this one, detectives work tirelessly to determine all of the facts and circumstances of exactly what happened so justice can be served. And I'm here today to announce that the grand jury work in our investigation has been completed and an arrest has been made. We worked closely with the United States Attorney's Office. Our detectives have interviewed several witnesses, and our detectives uncovered new evidence. On this past Friday, in consultation with the United States Attorney's Office, MPD had gathered enough information and evidence to apply for an arrest affidavit to a Superior Court judge. On Monday, that arrest warrant was signed by the judge charging 41-year-old Jason Lewis of Northeast DC with second-degree murder while armed. In this case, video evidence and hard work by our detectives was the key to piecing these events together. All of the facts of the case are outlined in the arrest affidavit, which will be available from the court. At 8 o'clock this morning, Mr. Lewis turned himself in and was taken into custody. I know the community has a lot of anticipation, and it is our job as the Metropolitan Police Department to investigate each crime to the full extent so that we can hold those responsible accountable.
So yeah, so we're gonna see where it comes from on that, because again, he claimed that the 13-year-old was breaking into cars and that he shot and killed him. Now here's my thing. I get it that we want to protect our family members. We really and truly do. But the man's not a threat to you. Why fire? I mean, my thing is, if he's not threatening you, then why are you shooting at him? Because that's what second-degree murder case comes into. But again, we'll have to follow that story as it comes along, because that to me is irresponsible ownership of a gun, that you use it to protect property, even though you yourself are not in danger. But again, we'll let the court, we'll see how the court case goes from there. But going back to President Biden for a second, he is starting to get on his victory lap again, as he is announcing part of his infrastructure deal. It'll be actually taking place in New York along the Hudson River to begin another part of the rail yard.
Biden in New York City today, touting that new tunnel under the Hudson River as part of that giant $1.2 trillion infrastructure law. Take a listen.
This is just the beginning. Just the beginning of finally constructing a 21st century rail system that's long, long overdue in this country. This project is critical to transforming the Northeast Corridor, increasing speeds, capacity, reliability, and safety. This law is the most significant investment in rail, since we created Amtrak over 50 years ago. And billions are going to projects along the Northeast Corridor, including replacing the existing Hudson Tunnel. That's why it's so important.
ABC News White House correspondent Karen Travers joining us now with more biggest takeaways from his speech, besides the fact that he was very energetic today, Karen.
Amtrak Joe really likes talking about train tunnels, Kira. He was up there in New York City to talk about nearly $300 million that's going to go to this critical phase of the Hudson Tunnel project. This is a big project. It's connecting New Jersey and New York, rehabilitating an existing tunnel and building a new tunnel. New Jersey Transit trains, Amtrak trains, hundreds of thousands of commuters going through those tunnels every day. And the president said this money is critical because it's going to jumpstart the building process. But that project in total, $16 billion. It is massive. But you heard the president there say it's going to create 72,000 good-paying jobs. He made that promise about a lot of union jobs. The president trying to highlight the infrastructure law, get some credit for it, talking about over $1 billion that has already been awarded to what the White House has been calling 9 mega projects, big bridges, big tunnels all across the country.
Okay, so I try not to be a Debbie Downer on this. I'm trying not to. Yes, you've heard me on this podcast before say that America is in woeful need of a mass transit system, because it's amazing how even countries like Japan, Australia, and other areas have a mass transit system. Some even have a bullet train system that can literally get you from one side of the country to the other in just a matter of hours. Why it's not been done in America, I've always asked that question. Does this seem like it's going to be a part of it? Yes, but only because it feels like, I can't put it so nicely, it feels like small potatoes. And I say small potatoes because you're connecting New Jersey to New York. Don't get me wrong, two major states that could benefit, especially if you do live in New York, and for some weird inclination, you may feel the need to go to New Jersey or back and forth. I'm not knocking it, because again, it is an alternative, because the one thing that's been missing in our country is alternatives, especially because for the most time, for you to get from one side of the country to the other, you have to fly. And if you're like me, you hate flying. Flying is something I choose not to do unless I actually have to. It is an unpleasant ass situation. The seats are small. They don't give you a lot of drinks. Your food items are almost nil. At the same time, you're hitting every speed bump in the air. Unless you're on Spirit, then you're praying before you get on that plane. But I've always asked, why is it that we do not have a mass transit rail system? Why is it that we do not have a bullet train that would literally go from the East Coast to the West Coast? Why not? Why not have central hubs across the Midwest and the lower states to get to literally everywhere you want to within the U.S. within reason? I mean, it's not like we're trying to build a tunnel to Hawaii. I mean, that would really kind of be cool if you think about it. But still, we're not trying to go that futuristic. But this is why I sit there and say, just, the whole idea of just building a tunnel, rehabilitating a tunnel, then building a new tunnel just between two states is $16 billion. But at the same time, our infrastructure project can be to increase more than that. Like I said before, America could really use that infrastructure bill and create paying jobs, good paying jobs. Let's be honest, it's union, it's construction. They are going to need builders, welders, contractors, things of that nature. So if you're in that industry, a lot of guys, men and women, will tell you it is very freaking lucrative. I mean, the hours are long, but the pay is good. But we could do the same thing, not just in those two states, but every other state. But again, there's always a certain roadblock that I just hate to stop talking about, but it always comes back to them, Republicans, because Republicans were against us spending money if it's not for the military, or if it's not for Wall Street, or if it's not for corporations, or if it's not for that stupid PPP loan program. That was terrible. And yet loans are forgiven, but student loans, they're going to make you pay for. Figure that out. But not trying to rain on Biden's parade. Can it be expanded? I absolutely believe that, but I'm still waiting for Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg to sit there and be like, we need to move forward on a project that can really connect America and give. Because if you think about this for 1 second, there would be so many people that will be up for going on a bullet train from one area to another than getting on a plane. Number one, have you tried getting on planes lately? It's not fun. Especially if your hub is crowded. Take off your shoes, go through TSA, getting searched, finding your bag, check in your bag, find your plane, get to your gate. Hopefully a plane seat where you don't get stuck between two people and it's uncomfortable. Or if you're first class, if you're lucky, then getting on the plane, getting somewhere, deplaning, getting your stuff. It's a little bit of a hassle. But imagine if you was on a bullet train. Just saying. Different ride, be nicer. But I'm not trying to knock Biden on this because, again, it is a move in the right direction. It is providing jobs. America's infrastructure is woefully in need of rehab and upgrades. But again, this is why I say I never understood how much we're giving the military when we could be giving it to our infrastructure, education, and other areas in government. But I digress. But as we're kind of getting to the end, guys, this guy keeps popping up more. This guy keeps popping up more than a Republican with an STD at a nurse's office. I almost went to Silk Sonic. I almost said this bitch. George Santos. I know. He is his own story that you think just when you think this man's story is done, he comes back with another. He is literally he really puts the scam in scoundrel. Let me rephrase that. He puts the scam in scandal. Yeah, that sounds better. Because now he has decided that he's going to recuse himself from all congressional duties. Sound familiar?
Lies as embattled New York Republican Congressman George Santos faces multiple investigations over his personal and campaign finances and lies about his resume and family background. Well, he now says he's going to recuse himself from sitting on any House committees as those investigations continue to heat up. Santos had been assigned seats on those committees, talking about the small business and also the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. ABC's Jay O'Brien joins me now live from Capitol Hill. So Santos continues just to refuse to resign. So what are you hearing up there on the Hill, Jay?
Yeah, Kira, our Rachel Scott asked Santos earlier, does he plan to resign? He says no, but I can tell you we heard from lawmakers who this came as a surprise to them. All of it starts in this meeting of House Republicans earlier today. George Santos telling his colleagues he will recuse himself from both of those committees. He will not serve on those committees. And just recently, he released a statement saying that he came to this agreement with Speaker Kevin McCarthy that he would recuse himself from both the Small Business and the Science, Space, and Technology Committee until Santos, as he puts it, can clear his name and undergo this Ethics Committee investigation. Santos believing that investigation will ultimately clear him. We have heard from Santos's colleagues, Republicans in the House, particularly New York Republicans, who say that this is not enough, that they want Santos to resign. But certainly both Santos and McCarthy framing this as something that they came to, but it was Santos's decision. Here's what McCarthy said earlier.
I think it was an appropriate decision that until he can clear everything up and he's off the committee. If I fill them, it'll be on a temporary basis. He'll be able to get committees back once there's cleared.
So another takeaway there is McCarthy saying the phrase temporary basis. So McCarthy, and it's tough to hear him in that video, but he says of Santos, the voters have elected him. He will have a voice in Congress. And then he goes on to indicate that there is a potential, as McCarthy views, that if Santos does get cleared by these investigations, that he could resume that both his seat on the Small Business Committee and the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. But of course, those investigations still swirling around Santos, and some of them are only in their beginning stages, Kira.
Wow. Well, meanwhile, and there's our Rachel Scott there chasing down Santos, who.
I mean, that's crazy. I mean, this is what he is like. This is what we're doing in the next chapter of George Santos. I mean, lied about going to schools, lied about being Jewish, may possibly be LGBTQ plus, but it really doesn't matter. But because he's Republican, see the point I'm getting at? This is why I sit there and say the entire time, whenever it comes to Republicans, being Republican is so, faking Republican is so freaking easy that if I decided tomorrow that everything I did was red state, owning the libs, Trump was this, the election was stolen, if I did all that and I just stuck with it, I guarantee I'd be on Fox News in less than 48 hours. I guarantee I would be getting the Candace Owens treatment before she said, Hitler wasn't that bad. Because that's the thing about Republicans. I hate to say it, but they're idiots. It's like, how in the world can you be conservative and not see the person you're voting conservative is not conservative? Not even who they say they are. Especially Santos, the prime example of this. Even more so, he's like, well, with everything going on, I just think that I just need to recuse myself from my congressional duties until it's sorted out. By who? The Ethics Committee? What are they gonna? I mean, now granted, the only thing he's copped to was, well, I'm not Jew, but I'm Jewish. What the fuck? What do you mean Jewish? You said you were a Jew, so own up to it or say that you lied. And let the Jewish community go from there, because their get back is strong. But with Santos, again, practically getting paid for doing nothing. It's like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Although Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't recuse herself from anything. I mean, she spouted QAnon theories. She tried to go after her fellow politicians on the Hill. She has spouted many times some obscene and sometimes downright derogatory comments at people. And yet it took a Democratic override to strip her of her congressional duties. But the House Minority Speaker at the time would not remove her from Congress, which in this case, Kevin McCarthy won't remove George Santos from office. Why? Because he needs every vote he can get with the Republicans having a slim majority over the House. So basically, him cutting off George Santos or kicking him out of Congress would basically be him cutting off his own foot and trying to still walk and trying to still run. So we're not expecting Kevin McCarthy to do anything because, it took him 15 tries to become House Speaker. Do you think for 1 second that he's going to do the right thing and actually get rid of somebody who more than likely shouldn't be there in the first place? Highly doubtful. But again, this man puts the scam in scandal. And eventually the Ethics Committee, and the scary part about all this is Now I think about it in the middle of Black History Month, that this man still may be allowed to be in Congress, which I've always sat there and said, if a con man can get into Congress, every other job asking about requirements, at this point, I am a freaking rocket scientist. Prove me wrong. But the last one I got, guys, before we get to our feel good news segment, is again goes back to HBCUs, because students at Bethune-Cookman are beginning to protest because of what happened after the chancellor and the AD director for Bethune-Cookman decided to split up with Ed Reed. Now, again, for all those that don't know, Ed Reed did go on to social media to sit there and say that he was being released because of conditions with the school, his office not being cleared, the field and practice facilities were not up to par. And again, he just felt overly lied to. The actual students there also backing him up about the living conditions at the HBCU are beginning protests to basically get things to change. Now, keep in mind, this is not the only HBCU out there. Jackson State, again, where Deion Sanders was there, had to move the kids to a hotel just so they can sleep and bathe properly during the water crisis they had there. Tennessee State University, where I live in Tennessee, they were having issues with housing to where students had to live. Students got moved to hotels. Now, again, when it comes to HBCUs, the question has to be asked, because Deion first said it, and apparently that made him a pariah, that these HBCUs pull in money, especially during their bowl, well, I won't call them bowl games, but their Southern Heritage, their classics, where they face another HBCU football team or basketball team, but it's a big shindig. It's a big celebration from before the game, day before the game, day during the game, and day after the game. It's a one big shindig. Money is being made at these HBCUs, but no one is asking the question where this money is going. In the training facilities? Probably not. And keeping the clean to maintain? Probably not. Even the students' dorms, which again, for guys that don't know, if you've never been to college, you are paying a boatload of money for a room that's about the size of a New York apartment. And you expect it to be clean and furnished, hopefully. But imagine going to a dorm room where there's mold, where possible pest infestation, that it's damn near unlivable. And you're paying to live there, paying to learn from there, paying for your education. So I get to the fact that a lot of these students, not just at Bethune-Cookman, not just at Jackson State, not just at Tennessee State University, it just seems to me that the HBCUs out there have some explaining to do about how they're handling things. Because the simple fact of the matter, it doesn't look well on their part. Because if I had to take a wild guess at it, as someone had said so eloquently on TikTok, the problem with HBCUs is that they're ran the same way as black churches. Damn. Look, if you feel offended, you probably go to a black church. But I can't argue that. But that being said, guys, we're going to move on to our feel good segment, because usually on How the Frack We Got Here, we do cover a lot of things that are doom and gloom. Sometimes we lose faith in humanity. But hey, it is Wednesday. Tomorrow's Friday, which is Thursday. We do want to leave you guys out some positive vibes. And this story, even with Black History Month, is right up my alley, because again, you guys heard me talk about flying earlier. I am not a very good flyer. I mean, I'm not freaking out. I'm not screaming, we're all going to die or all that stuff. I'm not being hysterical on a plane. I'm just very, very uncomfortable. Oh, I'll grab the seats. I'll close my eyes. And a lot of people say, we'll take Dramamine or take some noise canceling headphones. Have a couple of shots before you get on the plane. Let me tell you something. None of it works for me. I am alert. I am awake. And trust me, it is not a fun experience. But again, not a good flyer. Had I had this individual, I think I would have not cared if he held my hand the entire flight just to keep me calm.
Well, new tonight, a flight attendant being recognized for his humanity and kindness aboard a recent Delta Airlines flight. And a woman from Raleigh who was on that flight captured it all in this picture. This is from Molly Simonson Lee. She says she was on her way from Charlotte to New York when another passenger made it clear she was not comfortable flying. And at one point during that flight, that woman began crying. One of the flight attendants overheard that passenger and immediately came to comfort her and help her overcome her anxiety.
And he just was so reassuring, so calming, and said, you know what, I got you. I'm going to be there for you. Just anything you need, you let me know. And he was so wonderful and reassuring. With every little noise, she'd be like, what's that? And he said, that's okay. That's just the jet bridge pulling away, or whatever the case may be. And that really helped her. He didn't have to do that, and to see someone extend their heart in that way to a stranger was just beautiful to me, and I wanted to capture it.
And that picture has since gone viral. Molly says the flight attendant, whose name is Floyd Dean Shannon, sat there, as you see, for nearly 10 minutes, just holding that woman's hand and reassuring her that she was safe there.
Let me tell y'all something. I know as a man, I am not against, and I say this. I say this with all types of certainty. I am not against that gentleman. If he came over to me and said, do you want me to hold your hand? You can hold my hand. Don't even freaking care. If it gets me through this flight, take my hand. I'm good with that. So again, I just want to say it's acts of kindness. It really is, especially on a flight, because again, just real quick, it wasn't a man that held my hand on the flight. It was a 70-year-old black woman that held my hand on the flight. And she's like, and she did the old church caddy lady. It's gonna be okay, baby. It's just a plane. It's just a plane that goes in the air. We will be fine. You just hold my hand. And I mean, I wanted to be mad because she kind of parroted me, but I felt comfort. I felt safe. That being said, guys, that's going to do it for this podcast. I do thank you all for watching, for liking, for letting you know this is live. I certainly appreciate that. So shameless plugging before we do get out of here, guys. I do want to shout out to my buddy Vaughn, BigVZA on all socials. Definitely check him out as he is very active on Facebook and YouTube and TikTok, especially with his beats. Definitely check him out. Of course, guys, yours truly, I can be found BlackBox447 on all socials. Definitely like and follow me. I usually review and post everything that I watch, that I see, that I listen to, that I read, that I play. And gym stuff, because I do a couple push-ups. Also, the link at the bottom will make that just a wee bit bigger for you guys to see. If you copy and paste that link into your browser, we'll take you to the link tree that has the YouTube, Facebook groups for all of my podcasts, How the Frack We Got Here, Get Bit, and of course, the Off Limits podcast. Definitely like and share and subscribe. Again, I want to know, did you guys like it? Did you not like it? Did we cover enough stories, or or we missed something? I want to know. Please reach out to me on How the Frack We Got Here on YouTube or on Facebook to let me know, because I try to do my best to find news from appropriate sources, not just Fox. I mean, we don't use Fox News because, again, Fox News is not a real news station. Just let you know that. Before we do get out of here, guys, again, please be careful. Number one, Mother Nature is still mad at us in areas that may have snow, that may have ice and snow, that just might not be ideal for going out, but please be safe. If you are still traveling, especially on planes, trains, and automobiles, and you're going to be in large areas, please wear a mask, protect yourself. Even though they are turning down the emergency warnings for COVID, we are still in a pandemic. There's still COVID, it's still variations, and RSV, HSV, and there's so much stuff out there. So if you want to protect yourself, please wear a mask as you're traveling, because again, when you protect yourself, you protect others. We still need to get these numbers down. We still need to help our nurses, our doctors, our hospital professionals still do their jobs, because they are still running some shifts. So I always want to say shout out to the doctors and nurses and those in the hospitals who are still doing what they've been doing now for almost going on 3 years. But salute to you guys. So the last thing I'll say about How the Frack We Got Here, guys, is all about staying informed. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel. We are simply trying to give you all the information, allow you to make up your own mind. but we do provide a logical perspective that goes along with it. We do a lot better in society once we're informed. For progressive, we move forward. We try to right the wrongs of our past by making decisions now that we should have done back then, like electing our first black woman to the Supreme Court, electing our first black woman to the Federal Board of Governors, electing our first black 4-star military general. All great things. But when we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. That's why we keep asking ourselves, why does everything go up on our paycheck? Why do we elect different politicians for the same old game in Congress? And most importantly, how the frack we got here. Thank you all for watching, guys. Take care of yourselves and each other, and we will all get through this. Peace.